The following is a production of the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network.
Hello there, and welcome to another edition of Inside UFLB. Happy New Year, the first show of 2022. It is awesome to be back on the air hosting this show. My name is Dean Millard. I am the head of baseball operations for Ultimate Fantasy League Baseball and the commissioner of UFLB. And man, am I hoping for great things to come out of labor talks. I don't know if anybody's ever really been excited about labor talks unless you're hoping it ends what we're in, a lockout. This show, Inside UFLB, is presented by Ultimate Franchise Fantasy Sports, the most realistic fantasy platform you will ever find, the only fantasy sports platform on the blockchain where everyone is a player. You ever been in those leagues and somebody says, that person is not a fantasy player? This league, everyone's a player, from the starter to the backup, just like real-life teams that help you win a championship. So too will all the players on UFLB franchises. And of course, this show is proudly broadcast on Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network, your one-stop fantasy sports shop. We'll tell you a little bit later how you can get involved with UFSN. On the show today, we have a very special guest, Mike Wilner. He's currently a Toronto Star columnist, but he was also the Blue Jays play-by-play man from 2013 until 2020. And if you know anything about the Blue Jays, you know there were some pretty exciting bat flips, parrot trips, and more with those teams. Man, it was crazy. I remember being in the studios of TSN 1260 when that bat flip happened. And he also has a pretty cool podcast as well. So, without further ado, let's get to our guest today, Mike Wilner. Mike, it is great to chat with you, as we all hope we'll be chatting about baseball and not labor boards and boardrooms and things in the next little while, but it is fun in the dead of winter. Thankfully, we're past the minus 50s out here in Alberta, and we can maybe look forward to a little bit of spring. But I always want to start with a little background, and we know about your great career behind the mic, but I want to know, when you were a kid, who was your favorite baseball player that you absolutely loved to watch growing up?
I mean, for me, it depends on the definition of kid. I think when I was grade school little, I don't know who that would have been back then. I didn't really dive into baseball until I was 7 or 8. The Yankees were winning World Series, but I wasn't definitely didn't become a Yankee fan. And the Blue Jays were just starting. I guess back then I really liked Rick Bassetti. He was the Blue Jays center fielder, and he had a little flair. He would always make basket catches in center field, and that was sort of his thing. As I grew up and into my teenage years and later teenage years, for some reason, I really liked a guy named Bip Roberts, who played for the Padres and the Reds and the Royals, among other teams. He was sort of like the poor man's Ricky Henderson. He was a great leadoff man, got on base, stole bases, hit a bunch of doubles, hit for average, got hurt a lot, unfortunately. But he did, there was a time where it was Ricky Henderson was way at the top, Tim Raines was next, and then Bip Roberts was the next guy for a couple of years. And I really liked him. I can't tell you why, but I did.
That's amazing. I when I was a little kid, I was a Tony Pena fan just because of the way he sat behind the plate. And as you get older, you become a fan of for players for different reasons. But it's funny what makes you a fan as a kid, right? Or as a youngster. It's just something that catches your eye.
Yeah, absolutely. And someone maybe that not a lot of other people really like, so you kind of have your own little guy all yourself, but yeah, it is cool, and I can totally see that with Tony Pena for sure.
All right, so the lockout topic comes out in every baseball discussion. How does it not right now? I'd love to have one without it, and I hope we get there. But let's not spend too much time on it. I do have to ask your thoughts on what's happening right now, as it sounds like there's going to be another meeting soon.
Yeah, which is, great, because the last meeting they had was on December 1st and it lasted 7 minutes. And the owners said that they weren't willing to talk about any core economic proposals. And really, I don't know what else there is, to talk about besides that. So now they're probably going to make a proposal. It's not going to be their best, because it doesn't have to be their best in the middle of January, because nothing is at risk yet. It really is just so, I don't know. I'm done with it already. This is the first labor dispute that baseball's had in 28 years, and I'm already sick of it a month and a half in. There's no point. It's all about the billionaires wanting to keep as much of their billions as possible, not wanting to share it, wanting to get as much as they can and pay as little as they can, while their franchise values keep going up and the small market owners keep pocketing revenue sharing money. And it's I don't know. I mean, it's business, I guess, but it's so unseemly and it's just disgusting. I mean, every time there's a dispute like this, it's because the owners are trying to squeeze the players and continue to have things swing in their favor. The average salary in Major League Baseball has gone down 2 years in a row now, despite the fact that they're making more money than they ever have, ever. It's not that long ago. Well, I guess it is that long ago, 30, 35 years, that the owners were colluding as a group, where Andre Dawson had to give the Cubs a blank contract and just said, fill in the amount here so that he could go play for them because he wanted to. And they gave him $500,000 and he was the MVP. I mean, this is what they do, and this is what they'll continue to try to do. And the players hopefully are going to dig their heels in and require some gain, some fairness. You're not going to get everything back in one shot, but they could still have things be a lot more fair. They're never going to agree to a salary cap. I don't think they should, but maybe it wouldn't be such a terrible idea to enforce a floor. And yeah. I don't know, but I can't. It's gonna cost games, and the only people who lose are the people who love the game outside the game. The owners love the money. The players love to play. I'm sure they love the money. They love the game. But the fans are, as always, the losers in stuff like this.
And maybe this is the optimistic in me, or the fact that we're starting this massive fantasy baseball league and we won a season. I just can't see them going through 2020, and albeit a short season with no fans, and then coming back and delaying this. That's the optimistic part about me. And the things that I want to see coming out of this, you mentioned one of them, a floor, maybe a draft lottery like some of the other leagues have, and an expanded playoff. If you get those three things and baseball starts March 31st, I don't think baseball fans could be even any happier, although there are some other things that people want. But I think it's time for baseball. I don't think, like you said, there'll be a cap, but I think it's time for baseball to try to enforce some and create some rules for competitiveness.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, there's not going to be a floor without a cap. That's just absolutely not going to happen. I'm sure they want to expand the playoffs, but again, expanded playoffs is a benefit for the owners, right? Players don't make any money in the playoffs. They make their money over the course of the regular season. They don't get paid for the playoffs. They get their playoff share or whatever that is. But the owners are the ones who are raking in the dough. So for an expanded playoff to happen, then the owners are going to have to give something back to the players. I think an expanded playoff will be on the table. I think the universal DH will be on the table, but it won't be as big a carrot for the players as the owners want it to be. And I already forgot the third thing: the floor, the expanded playoffs,
and maybe a draft lottery.
Oh, draft lottery! Draft lottery would be great. I would, I kind of go really, really far the other way on the idea of a draft lottery. I think that to encourage teams to be as good as possible, I think that the team that comes the closest to the playoffs and misses should either get the first pick or have an equal chance as the worst team to get the first pick. I'm all for competitiveness. I'm all for discouraging tanking. We're in a situation right now in Major League Baseball where why would a team pay a middle range veteran player so that they can go from 68 wins to 71? No, they're not interested in that. They'd rather just take some young player making the minimum to do that, and it leaves the middle class out in the cold. I think that it's a little much to hope for all those things to happen by March 31st, especially since the players don't lose a paycheck till after that. The owners really don't care about any gates that they lose in April because other than opening day, there's small crowds with poor weather and kids in school and a lot of that stuff. So I'm not optimistic, unfortunately.
Well, and you're probably more realistic than I am as opposed to optimistic. But let's talk about something that is more fun. And you mentioned an expanded playoffs, and the Blue Jays came so close. This is a team that you covered as play-by-play man for many years and was around. So your thoughts on the Blue Jays, the transition from last year to this year, and even you can go back further to, I wasn't sure when they went out and brought in Ryu that it was the smartest thing because I wasn't sure they were ready. And I think they proved me a little bit wrong by their progress. I wasn't sure the Blue Jays would be as far developed as they are right now. Have they surprised you? And what do you think of them coming into this next season?
Yeah, I think they've surprised everybody. I mean, when they signed Hyunjin Ryu going into the 2020 season, I kind of figured it was to pay off in 2022, this year, because this would be the year where they were finally ready to make that push. And clearly, they surprised everybody last year when they were pretty much the best team in Major League Baseball from July 30th on, or at least a top 3 team in the major leagues from the point in time at which they moved back to Toronto. I think they surprised their own front office, which is why the bullpen was in such shambles for the first 3 months of the season that I don't know if they felt like the team was good enough to really invest in the bullpen at that point in the season when it could have saved the season, until they finally did at the end of June by getting Adam Simber and then a week later getting Trevor Richards and then making the deals that they made at the deadline. So you're certainly not alone. The last time there was a full season in Major League Baseball, the Blue Jays lost 95 games. In the shortened season, I think they were 31-29 or 32-28. So just barely above 500. Nobody expected 90 wins from them this year, except for the players, Bo Bichette and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Alek Manoah and Jordan Romano and all these guys. They expected the team to be as good as it was, if not better. But, you hear players talk like that every spring, going into every season. So it was natural to believe that the Jays would be an 85-ish win team, maybe a little bit better, maybe a little bit worse. But they went and they blew the doors off and they got to within a game of making the playoffs. And there's, no question or no reason to believe that they're not going to be as good in 2022. They have some things to address. Obviously, you got to replace Marcus Semien. You've got to find something at third base. But, locking up Jose Barrios helps. Bringing in Kevin Gossman helps. It's the bones of a very good team are there.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have been concerned about some of the trades. I thought they were aggressive and they were good moves to give that team that experience of getting that close, and then they get hungrier for the next year and continue to do it. So, I think the Blue Jays, they're not underrated where we live. Of course, a lot of people pay attention. They might be a little bit underrated in the rest of Major League Baseball, although I think people are starting to pay attention. But, what team or teams do you look at in Major League Baseball that you think are a little bit underrated as we head into this next season?
Underrated. I mean, maybe it still depends on what happens once the lockout's over, what kind of moves teams make. If Cleveland doesn't trade Jose Ramirez, that's a team that really nobody's looking at. And they were almost a 500 team last year without the Cy Young Award winner, and with a lot of pitching issues that they might not have going forward. I don't think you can call San Diego underrated, because they were a team that a lot of people expected to win last season but fell way short. But there's reason to believe they're going to be good again. The Phillies, and if the Reds don't pack it in, I mean, you never know with them, and with whether they're going to trade some of their starting pitching, and they've let guys walk who they shouldn't have. But there's a really good little core of offense there, and some very good starting pitching too. But Philly's got the guy who should have won the Cy Young, and they've got the MVP, and they're playing in a weak division. That's a pretty good underrated team right there.
Indeed. Well, you have had the pleasure of calling games for the Toronto Blue Jays starting in 2014, and it just coincided with some pretty exciting times. Just being around the Blue Jays, being behind the mic. That experience for you, especially during some of those exciting times. I know, where I was in a studio doing a night show, watching those games, and I'm in Edmonton, where Oilers rule, even in July and August, and we were flooded with Blue Jay calls for some of those great playoff moments. What sticks out for you as being behind the mic at those times?
Oh, it was an incredible experience. First to get the, to get the opportunity to do that. Never mind, get finally some good Blue Jays games, good Blue Jays teams to call the games. The first game I ever called was in 2002, I want to say, or 2003. Can't remember. Just a 1-inning thing in Detroit, and then I got to do it full time starting in 2013, when the Blue Jays were the Vegas favorites to win the World Series because of the two big trades that they made in the offseason. And that wound up being awful because they stunk and they finished in last place. But then in 2014, they were in first place at the end of July, and they were in a playoff spot at the end of August, and things were starting to look up. But 2015 was a whole other animal completely. It was just not quite start to finish, because they were always, we thought they were better than they were, but they had that 11-game win streak, and then at the trade deadline, everything changed, and in August and September of 2015, they never lost. They almost legitimately never lost. They played close to 800 ball, which doesn't happen. And then to go through that playoff run, and then to roll it back in 16, there were just some amazing times. Calling Marco Estrada almost throwing a perfect game at the Trop was unbelievable. That game 5, obviously, against Texas, I had the inning before the big inning, but I got to call Edwin's home run that tied the game when it looked like the Jays weren't going to be able to score. And just to feel that again at Rogers Center. I got to call the Canada-US game in the World Baseball Classic, I want to say 2009. That was just an incredible game. Joey Votto hit a couple of home runs. Russell Martin went deep. They almost beat the States. It was a packed house at Rogers Center, and people were going nuts. And that was the first time the ballpark had felt like that since 1993, and it didn't feel that way again until 2015. And those 2 years were just so magical. Absolutely.
Yeah. How many kids were walking down the street walking the parrot during those times, right? It just kind of gripped the country. And like I said, we're in hockey country here, and it was dominated by Blue Jay talk for that time. So it was a lot of fun. And, being behind the mic for a baseball game, as you said, it's an honor. And I've had the honor of calling hockey play-by-play. I've called football. I've called volleyball. I haven't had the chance to do play-by-play. Well, I have my whole life. As growing up, you're doing the play-by-play when you're playing pitcher and catcher with your friends. So as a kid, I just love listening to the radio And, you know, the Blue Jays had obviously some legendary radio commentators over the time. And I grew up, you know, pre-internet, so that was our entertainment outside, play and catch, listen to the Blue Jays games on CKLQ in Brandon, Manitoba. But just the pace of baseball is just so much different. And the job of a play-by-play man or woman is to paint the picture, especially on the radio. And baseball gives you that opportunity. I mean, I'm among millions in saying Vin Scully to me is the best and he's my favorite, but there's so many things about baseball play-by-play that can just be amazing. I just wonder what you think of kind of the romanticism of being a play-by-play man on the radio for baseball.
I mean, it is. You summed it up beautifully. It really is. It's a romantic thing. It's the soundtrack of the summer. You know, it's first of all, it can be great background noise when you're barbecuing or on the patio or by the pool or whatever. You know, it's got that slow pace, and you don't have to be locked in on every word that the broadcaster is saying. You know, where hockey is a lot more frenetic and football is sort of stop and start. But the rhythm of a baseball game and the length of a baseball game, it just lends itself to, I think, allowing a broadcaster's personality to come through a little more, tell a few more stories. You look around the field and see what's going on. There's a lot of time in between pitches to fill, and it's a lot of fun figuring out how best to fill that time. And it you know, I miss it a lot. And I got the opportunity to call a few games in 21, one with the New Hampshire Fisher Cats and a few with the Israeli Olympic team, which were just an absolute blast. But it's just so much fun to just sit there and talk the game. You almost feel like you're part of a conversation with whoever's out there in radio land listening, and you want to paint the best picture that you possibly can. And you want to sort of bring them into the ballpark with you.
Yeah, totally. I didn't have a grandpa growing up. Both of my grandfathers passed away too early. I always felt like Vin Scully was my grandpa telling me about the baseball game. That's how I kind of looked at it, because he would go from like Fernando Valenzuela to the Beatles back to whoever was pitching that day, and wouldn't miss a beat, and you wouldn't be confused at all. And it's just such a calming voice. So I think that's really what it is all about.
He set a standard that's impossible to approach. I mean, you know, he watched Babe Ruth, right? He could take you through a game this year or last year and say, oh yeah, I remember when Sandy Koufax did that, or when I talked to Don Drysdale or Duke Snyder, or Hank Aaron. So yeah, no one will ever be able to do what Vin Scully did. But, aside from that, he had such a gift for the language, and he told such incredible stories, and he did it by himself. You know, he could sit there for like 3 innings by himself, and 9 innings sometimes, and you were fine with it as a listener. He's the gold standard, and I'm glad that you had him to listen to while you were growing up. That's amazing.
Yeah, I wish everybody could still. I used to have on some of my old PVRs. I would just keep old Vin Scully games, or I find them on YouTube and watch them just to hear him talk every once in a while. What about so we know obviously about your broadcasting. What about fantasy baseball? Have you been a fantasy baseball guy much in your life?
Yes and no. Never fantasy the way that fantasy is done now. I was, old school. I did the old rotisserie baseball where you had the 5x5 stuff. And I've been a big player of simulation baseball games ever since I was a kid. I'm in a league now that's going into I just finished the regular season. We finish in January and then have playoffs in February and March. And this is the 35th season, I think.
Wow.
Of this simulation league. So yeah, it's been a long time. I co-founded it back in 1987, but I've never done this daily fantasy stuff. I have never loved the idea that, you know, you put a team together, but if you don't start a guy one day and he goes off, you don't get that. And so and I've kept to, like, I was in this rotisserie league with people from high school until, I don't know, 01, 02, somewhere along the line of that. And I was working on the broadcast in baseball, and I won the league 2 years in a row. And I thought, okay, it's enough. I'll let somebody else go have fun with it. So I let that go. But it really is changing the way people watch the game, and people take in all kinds of sports for sure.
Well, if you love simulation, I was a big Stratomatic guy when I was a kid, so that's the kind of the simulation game. But there's so many great ones, and if you like that, you're going to love our Legends League, which is being built by Matt Soren, who you would know from Team Israel at the Olympics.
Right.
And that's how we were connected to Ian Kinsler as well. And he's heading up the Legends League, so we're going to bring back all the best players, get their statistics, throw it in a game or some format, and that's going to be what our Legends League is. And you can you imagine? We're almost at 150 years of baseball history when the National League started. So there is a massive amount of legends that you could put into a Legends League. But we have our UFLB draft in March. And I wonder if you had the first overall pick in a 30 franchise baseball draft, because our league is as realistic. Who do you think you would take? Maybe this is some food for thought for the team that has the first overall pick. Who would be your number one player in a baseball draft for a season-long points? It's not a head-to-head, but you do a starting lineup. Who would be your guy that you would take first overall?
It's a really good question. And are you talking about? I assume you're talking about something that's going to carry forward, right? That you're drafting
Dynasty.
someone, yeah. Right. So I think it probably is Juan Soto. He's young. He's incredible. There's really not much he doesn't do well. There's this wonderful group now of 21, 22-year-olds. Fernando Tatis and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. are in there. But Juan Soto seems to be ahead of the pack right now, and he's a guy who, if you've got on your team, he's amazingly fun to watch. So that's an extra added bonus, though I guess that applies to Guerrero and Tatis as well. I don't think you could go wrong with any of them. Positionally, maybe you lean towards Tatis because he's a shortstop, but he's got the shoulder thing, and I was really surprised that he didn't get it operated on in the offseason, especially with this long offseason. And it put him on the injured list at least twice last year.
And he wasn't good in the outfield when they tried him out there.
No, he wasn't. I mean, he threw a couple of people out, but he's a tremendous shortstop, and you get positional value there. But there's a lot of value in being able to stay on the field too. And until he gets that shoulder fixed, I'm not confident that he'll be able to do that. So for me, that sort of ekes Soto out ahead. And I know that any Jays fans listening will be, well, no, it should be Vladdy. But as great as he is, and I think he's just going to continue to be great, he's a first baseman. We'll see if the Jays sign Freddie Freeman and they move Vlad back to third, then that changes the equation a little bit. But again, I don't think you could go wrong with any of those guys.
Yeah, positional stuff is so important, especially in a dynasty league, or, obviously there are some positions that have more value and more talented players than others. You look at the catching position, and we always see that in baseball leagues or hockey leagues when the goalies go, right? There's a bit of a run on catchers in baseball. And I kind of think that, you can almost take whatever your top 6 players are, you could put them in a hat and pick out of a hat, and you should be happy with those top 6 guys. As some of those guys that you mentioned, the young guys in baseball that you're looking at a dynasty. And then there's Shohei Ohtani. And in our league, just like the Angels, you'll start Shohei Ohtani as a pitcher and get his hitting stats. I love the idea of that. I'm not sure, though, how long Shohei Ohtani is going to be able to do this at the highest level. I mean, how many times is the starting pitcher in the All-Star game going to hit over 40 home runs or whatever it was? It was just a crazy thing to think about. What's your thoughts on Ohtani, the Angels, and his fantasy value?
I mean, the value's got to be incredibly high, right? Because like you said, you're filling 2 spots with one guy. The question is durability and how long he's going to be able to perform the way he performed. I mean, it's funny because when the whole debate Vladdy or Ohtani for MVP was going on. There were people who said, well, then don't you just have to give Ohtani the MVP every year? And the answer is, well, only if he's like a top 10 pitcher and a top 10 hitter. And that's really, really hard to do. I think people forget just how difficult it is to excel, and especially to excel at both aspects of the game. There's a reason he's only done it once, and there's certainly no guarantee that he's going to be able to do it again and again and again and again. He is one guy who fills 2 roster spots, so that's extraordinarily helpful in fantasy. But, he's been hurt. I know that batting average generally counts, and his isn't especially terrific, but he does get on base and he hits home runs and he steals bases, which is a huge thing as well. He's got to be a top 5 guy, I think, until he shows that he's not going to be performing at that level, just because he's really 2 guys in one.
Mm-hmm. And if he brings his strikeouts down, well, then he becomes, because we have negative points for strikeouts. And so, that's and I think when you're looking at fantasy and you want to be realistic, there should be negative points more than just the errors, because we see the baseball game now has become, hit it over the shift or strike out is kind of the unfortunate way it's going. And you mentioned some of those guys like Bip Roberts. I grew up, I loved the Cardinals, and they were such a fast team that could hit. I don't know if we're ever going to get back to that again, but some kind of balance would certainly be nice. And Mike, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us on Inside UFLB, our first edition of 2022. And who knows, maybe we'll see you back behind the mic, maybe in one of our Legends games calling some baseball or something. But I've really enjoyed this chat, and I hope we can do it again. Where can people find you and on social media or anything out there and follow your work?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure. I appreciate it a lot. And getting behind the mic again would be a lot of fun. But you can find me in the pages of the Toronto Star and on the website. You can find me every week on my podcast, Deep Left Field. Comes out every Thursday afternoon. And you can find me on Twitter at Wilnerness. And I'm tweeting about all kinds of things all the time, baseball, life, COVID, all kinds of things. You'll find that I'm very interactive and I'm easy to get a hold of. So hopefully, read me in the paper, listen to the podcast, follow me on Twitter. It's all good.
We certainly will. Thank you so much, Mike.
My pleasure.
Well, that was a really, really fun conversation, and I would love to do it again. And who knows, maybe we'll see Mike working with here on the UFLB program. If you want to get in touch with us on Twitter, you can find us at the UFLB. You can also reach Brian Hernandez, who is our director of scouting, at UFLB_scouting. Reach out to him. If you want to get involved in scouting on this platform, try to make some side money, put your knowledge to the test, build your scouting resume, make sure you reach out. You can list players for $20 US worth of score coin, or you can buy them in auctions, and when they get to the major leagues, a franchise will be paying for those players. So check it out, UFLB_scouting on Twitter. If you'd like more information on UFLB, info UFLB at UFFsports.com. You can also reach the network UFSN at UFFsports.com. And of course, the websites www.UFFsports.com and UltimateSportsNFTs.com is where all of the action is. All right, that was a great conversation with Mike. I really, really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed his play-by-play. I love talking to play-by-play guys, especially in baseball. As I said, it's such a different animal. Just like the UFLB. Ultimate Fantasy League Baseball. We're hoping to kick off March 31st. We have a lot to accomplish until then, including this Saturday. We have owner meetings. Now, GM staff can also attend 2 p.m. Eastern. We're going to sort out some things that we need to decide on as a league. You, the franchise owners, need to decide on. And then the following meeting is when we will talk about some proposals, potential proposals from owners to vote on. But we're going to have to set up some ground rules and some different things that the owners should have a say on. And that'll happen this Saturday. The one thing that won't be discussed, I put it out on Telegram yesterday, is there will be no trades during the initial 26-round player draft. You can, if you want to agree in a trade in principle with somebody, but you're doing it at your own risk and you're doing it with good faith. But let's say you wanted to trade a third and a fourth round pick for a second round pick. You would just draft the player that franchise wanted, and then they would draft the player you wanted if you wanted to do that. But remember, it's all on good faith. No trades can be submitted until after the draft. Rosters are on UFF's site, and then you can go trade crazy. And I hope you all do, because I love a league with a lot of trades. We've seen a lot of trades in our hockey league for sure, UFHL. So hopefully we'll see the same thing in this league as well. So team meeting, owner meetings on Saturday, 2 p.m. Eastern. Of course, all the owners and GMs will get the link and everything, so you can get in on the action for sure. All right, that is going to wrap up our first show of 2022 and our new look. Big thanks to IKS Media for putting together these awesome graphics. Simply fantastic. Of course, Inside UFLB is part of the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network, UFSN, one-stop fantasy sports shop. We have UFHL now with new host, Kyle Hall. We have Tracking the Draft. We have UFAFL Nation with Michael Skrizniak. And we have something for you hoop fans coming very soon. It's going to be awesome. And the list of shows is going to continue to grow. If you want to follow along at UFS Network on Twitter, you can find UFSN, Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network, on YouTube. And if you have a fantasy show you want to get on our network, if you want to join us, hit us up through email, ufsn@uffsports.com. All right, big thanks once again to our guest of the day, Mike Wilner, former Jays play-by-play man, Toronto Star columnist. It was indeed a pleasure to chat with Mike on the show today. Thank you so much for tuning in to all of our shows on UFSN. Thank you for being a part of UFFS. It is the future of fantasy, and the fantasy future is here. Thanks once again to IKS Media for the terrific graphics, including this extra. We'll see you next week.